This report that you have is the culmination of what has been an exciting and an enlivening process, a process from which I've learned so much myself too, an initiative that has involved an attempt to make an intellectual and I believe a moral journey into some of the most pressing and urgent questions facing Ireland at this time, and to try to discover sources for a reappraisal and a new beginning. Indeed, as Ola has set out, my own thinking was set out in a number of speeches that are referred to in the report, and I hope that are all on our website. There were 8 key speeches. The first, I remember, in DCU was towards an ethical economy, and that raised issues. If at the title of that, it questioned the scholarship that was at the basis of the connection between economics, politics, and social policy. The second was a speech given to St. Vincent de Paul, who are in fact launching a major consultation on getting beneath the surface of poverty. The third was one given to after the European Union had decided on 2015 as the year of development. And then there was the one which has been referred to by Ola, which was very important, was a joint meeting of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission and the National Women's Council, which addressed the issue of women's rights looked at comprehensively across all of the categories of living. Then the fifth was the Edward Phelan lecture, which dealt with the definition of work and what would we call work in the future, and the concept of decent work and the precarious. And then we had a wonderful national seminar here in Áras an Uachtaráin, where we reviewed how far we had been with the different consultations. And then I had an opportunity of speaking to the Wheels annual conference, who had been conducting a very important conversation throughout the year. And then in July of 2015, at the Humanitarian Summit, as we prepared for climate change and we prepared the meeting of the Sustainable Development Goals. I want to say that that was, if you like, I'm mentioning it to say that was my departure point. But the most important part of it was what was going on around all of these in these different spaces. Spaces of an intellectual kind, spaces of a social active kind, spaces of reflection within universities. The initiative, I'm happy to say, was able to enter into partnership with so many discussions and debates. It initiated some too at community and national level. And they were urgent debates in which the public have shown an enthusiasm about how we might build in this country an inclusive republic, one that was in keeping with the idealism of the founders of the state. Mar gurt me vinis mona shaskimir tirshul mar quid a hunska vetica uktran herin. The President of Ireland's Ethics Initiative involved over 60 events hosted in third-level institutions. Now, some of these were connected to each other. Then there were, secondly, events and projects run by non-governmental organisations. And thirdly, and very importantly, and Chris will tell you more about this, events hosted and run in local communities all around the country. And so the report that you have before you today concentrates very much on those 3 categories. I felt it was important as well to say a sincere thank you to all of you for coming along and so that we are able to reflect on that very fine work. The report you have today then will show you the scale and richness of the wide range of activities run under the banner of the initiative. And I have to say, the response was astounding. Of one thing we are certain, there is no reluctance on people to become involved in a debate as to the kind of future that they want. Chris McInerney, as I said, will speak in more detail about some of those activities because he was involved directly with the people. And you will in the report see a summary of the issues that were most important to people at the cafe discussions, for example. But you'll also see accounts of international conferences that were held, because so many of the issues we deal with, issues of participation, eliminating poverty, women's rights, ecological responsibility, qualities of participation and so forth, they are not confined to national boundaries. So there were very many insignificant international conferences with which we were able to interact. There were university lectures. And there were workers' campaigns and coffee shop discussions, and the topics ranged from what should be our response to global poverty, how are we to measure economic growth, how can we measure poverty, to the failures in regulation and professional shortfalls of accounting and banking. For again and again from the discussions came issues of trust, and different perspectives in the debate about ethics of a philosophical kind, such as, for example, Professor Honora O'Neill's and my own, and we discussed this in several different venues about trust. But as is set out in the report, the initiative was designed to stimulate discussion across all sectors of Irish society on the challenge of considering how we might live together ethically. So it commenced with an invitation then to the third level institutions to discuss and review, particularly in the light of institutional failures, the consequences of this missing debate in an atmosphere of a decline in sources of authority and a public embracing of self over society in so many different parts of the discourse, how we might address the principles and values by which we might wish to live together as a society. I think David Harvey's notion as well about how we might consciously craft the institutions and the relationships by which we might be able to live together ethically is a profound question. But the debate sought to involve community and non-governmental organisations, and I want to thank them for the response that they made. They responded generously, with enthusiasm. There was a wonderful response from the Wheel, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, the National Women's Council, as if you've heard, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, and DOCUS. Each of these organisations with such wide affiliates explored in detail some of the key social issues facing the country in the wake of that crisis. Questions such as what constitutes community, solidarity, decent work, meaningful equality, what was the extent of and what reduces poverty, and what might make an attempt at helping achieve global justice. And then I had interaction through the year with different people who are at the coalface of all of this. People like Brother Kevin, whom I'm delighted to see here this morning. The debate broadened out to incorporate community conversation on how we could build together an ethical society. And during those conversations, new important themes emerged, and many significant problems and obstacles were identified. For example, the necessity of restoring trust in public institutions, the need to return to the language of citizen instead of customer, taxpayer or client, and the consequences of returning to what I've referred to as a depeopled version of the economy as we move out of recession. Again and again, the importance of locating economic policy within a framework of social values that could create and sustain social cohesion came to the fore of discussion. Thinking this morning of what I would say to you, I reflected back on the response to my first lecture towards an ethical economy, ethics for all, and the real difficulties that are there in securing a space for pluralist scholarship that might be at the basis of rich economic theories that can address in a new way new challenges globally, such as climate change, sustainable development, issues of poverty at home here or in Europe or globally. And that I recognised was a real challenge, because the response, it seemed to me, came, as it were, from a silo of ideological assumptions that were not open to criticism, and that is a real challenge. On the other hand, there was such enthusiasm from those meetings out in the community, where people were really saying, we want to know, and we are capable of knowing, and we are capable of understanding all of the things that are described as complex and beyond our ken. Again and again, the importance of locating economic policy within a framework of social values that could create and sustain social cohesion came to the fore of discussions. So tucht le céile tar randwanta na córáte agus an machna sa túrascualatá iru láfih. So winter briasta, cuirtar nuliad agus crif scuiltrí de lucht éisteachta níos léine. So the report brings together and distills the fruits of that discourse and reflection, And our attempt is to capture and disperse it to a wider audience. That's why we are circulating the report. And I want so sincerely to thank Chris and his colleagues Kieran Keohane of University College Cork and Kieran Lynch of LIT for their valuable work in editing this final report. I asked them to edit this themselves, and they did it so well. And I'm sure that all of you who have been involved in the initiative will agree that they've done an excellent job in reflecting the richness and range of the initiative and the salience of the outcomes. Now, a report such as this, given its intention and the process I've described, was never considered to be an end in itself. Words must simply not be separate from or unconnected to the actions necessary to effect real transformation. So while I have thanked you all for coming here to Áras an Uachtaráin for the official launch of the report of the President's Ethics Initiative, the further purpose of this morning's event is to address the question, what comes next? I'm happy to say that the report itself already points to a number of direct outcomes that will carry this work of reflection and debate forward. Initiatives are emerging in the universities and in society to continue the work of the initiative and to stimulate a wider and deeper national conversation. For example, arising directly from the President's Ethics Initiative has been the establishment of the Centre for the Study of the Moral Foundations of Economy and Society, which aims to create a structured academic programme dedicated to studying the moral underpinnings of economic and social life. That foundation has the capacity to contribute to the restoration of pluralism in economic theory and in scholarship, and adequacy as a result in social policy. And I'm so delighted we have already launched it. The necessity then to educate our young people, to think critically, to question, and to look beyond the horizons of the familiar or the unfairly taken for granted has been recognised by the forthcoming introduction of philosophy into the secondary school curriculum, which I welcome as a beginning. And I have to say too, as I went around the different third level institutions, it was very much, the ethics initiative was taken as an opportunity for people in different silos within the third level to introduce themselves to each other, philosophy, economics, politics, and so on. And I felt that this was very good, particularly for the young scholars who are starting out on careers and which I think were being invited, as it were, to return to the global issues. There is much intellectual work, of course, to be done, and I hope that involvement in the President's Ethics Initiative has perhaps, as I said, reintroduced these subjects I've mentioned to each other, particularly philosophy and economic theory. But this ethics initiative and this report was never intended to be a purely academic exercise. Its messages are profoundly practical and profoundly political in the best sense, and they must be seen in the context of a wider process of the necessary transformation of Irish society. If we are to build a better life together in which we will not only survive but flourish, a better Ireland, we must not only be clear on the obstacles to be overcome and on the shape and institutional form that this better Ireland should take, but also on what actions we must all take for its construction, how we must address institutional atrophy. And when I was inaugurated as President of Ireland in November 2011, Ireland was, as I've already said, in the depths of a great economic and social crisis. A series of profound failures in banking, in regulation, in governance and in policy. And this had prompted a great and understandable anger and sense of disillusionment among the Irish people. And that was my starting point of seeking to get beyond that. And in my inaugural address, I set out an objective of beginning a process of discussion on the transformation of Ireland from that moment of crisis and broken expectations for so many to the real and inclusive republic in which I believed and in which I continue to believe, and so many believe that can indeed represent the best of our Irishness now and in the future. So during the first year of my presidency, I established the Being Young and Irish initiative in order to listen to the views, concerns and vision of a generation that would be critical for the shaping of a new Ireland. Originally, I had intended to call it Being Young in Ireland, and I realised so many of our young Irish had gone abroad. So I changed the title so that I would be able to speak to those who had gone abroad. And also, I'm very happy to say, I was able to speak to those who were in institutional settings. I think that the people, young people, that report which we have published on that, the young people emphasise such values as solidarity, equality, inclusion, pluralism, freedom of thought and expression. And it was their findings that led me to the second initiative in one sense. As a second project, then, I commenced the President's Ethics Initiative as a deliberative process which could mine into those deep-rooted issues identified as being central to the problems facing the future of Irish society. I believe that the Ethics Initiative has succeeded in mapping out the issues that need to be addressed and the type of changes that need to occur. Changes in governance, in regulation, in culture, in language, in discourse, the way we speak to each other and listen to each other, in education, to name just some. And now, as a new phase of transformative action must begin, Ireland is at a critical time. On the one hand, we can invoke the character of the Ireland we wish to create in a year during which we reflect and reimagine the Republican ideals articulated 100 years ago, invoking values as expressed by the leaders of the Rising in their text, to create a country worthy of the title Republic. At the same time, we have to acknowledge the international context of our action. A global development agenda has been finalised that is there as an aim to be achieved. A strategy for addressing climate change has been agreed, which has demands which have to be fulfilled. And we, along with our fellow global citizens, must bring a new roadmap into being for a sustainable future. That involves change in all the areas I have mentioned. A republic, by its very definition, cannot be a republic for some, but not for others. It must be a place of inclusion and equality and participation, where the full participation of all citizens is understood as a right, but also as a democratic duty. Neither can any state based on principles of human rights and justice pursue its own national interests to the detriment of those with whom we share our fragile planetary home. So we are now on to the most testing phase of our journey of transformation, as we work to close the gap between word and deed and begin the task of building that new and better Ireland. And this report is intended as just a modest contribution to help us undertake that process. And a key message that is contained within it is that each of us has a role to play as interdependent beings. So it is surely disingenuous to talk or write about the shape of an ethical society while passing on the responsibility for the creation of such a society to other individuals and other institutions. Transformation must extend into every corner of society, into our communities, our schools, our workplaces, into the worlds of business and finance and public service, and the arts and cultural sphere, into the political and electoral choices which we all make. And it must encompass the needs of all our people as interdependent beings, sharing vulnerabilities and possibilities at every stage and every circumstance of life. The response to the Ethics Initiative and the high level of interest shown at all levels of society demonstrates, I believe, that there is an appetite there among our people to take up this challenge. There is positive momentum evident in so many ways and at all levels of our society, with so many already translating words into deeds, showing us how we can effect real and positive change. Last month in this room, I spoke at an awards ceremony here in Áras an Uachtaráin of the Red Cross Register of Pledges, where the generosity of many Irish citizens has translated into concrete offers of accommodation, goods or services, such as tutoring or counselling to refugees coming to our country. We also witnessed last year the great humanitarian work of our naval service as they rescued thousands of those who had fled to Europe to seek refugee status. when confronted with the ethical challenge of displacement and human tragedy, so many Irish people have stood up to be counted and to play their part. And I think also of the great and instinctive sense of community solidarity that came to the fore during the recent flooding in many parts of the country. In my work as president, I am inspired every day by the magnificent volunteers working at every level of our society to help those in need and to improve their community, their country, their world. This is Ireland at its best. Agus ní léon dáteach go bhfuil an til an dul am gníomhach de cadra bhíanamh agus an tucaí ahrú ó bhain is ach faoíach féidir clí, ní mór inis taraf a bhaint as an achfin sin. I curry bhaim agus in níomh I dros go néinfaní haháin or saci a chaulú ach I ahrú ó bhain. There can be no doubt that a will to act, to engage and to transform society exists. It is a valuable, indistinguishable resource. So what must come next is the harnessing of that resource, its translation into deeds and actions, and reflections and theories that will promote not just the reimagining, but the transformation of our society. Later this year, I will be launching a third special initiative of my presidency, which will introduce themes aimed at how this might be accomplished, both at a practical level and at the level of consciousness and policy. So today, as we launch the report on the importance of ethics, we must resolve that we will take real action to not just close a chapter on that which has not been the best version of ourselves in recent times, but begin a new one, choosing to create opportunities that will invite citizens to what is a real republic founded on true freedom, inclusion and equality, a republic in which we can all be participatory and proud citizens of our Irishness. Thank you very much.